Senator Antic, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Good to talk to you, and congrats on the new podcast.
No,
I like
thank
the
you, mate.
name.
Yeah, well, let's hope it is a bit ballsy. We've had some interesting topics,
Yeah.
particularly last time, Rachel Vaughan talking through her experiences. But to get into the world of politics, we've obviously had the election pretty recently. The Liberals struggled. We'll get to that soon, but it's where do we go to from here? Because we're seeing potentially on the cusp of World War III. We're now seeing the Labor government under Albanese saying we're going to tax unrealised capital gains in people's super. Well, I'm not sure people plan for anything like this.
No, and I'm not sure they voted on anything like this either, of course. It's actually very interesting this unrealised tax on super issue because you've seen recently a couple of fairly significant Labor stalwarts in the form of Bill Kelty and others say, well, we don't really think this is a very good idea, and particularly on the issue of the unrealised gains side of it. I mean, it's sort of to me where I sit. I'm always reminded of the words of Margaret Thatcher, who said, the problem with socialism is they eventually run out of other people's money. And I think we're sort of starting to see that here. For people that are not across it, though, what's being proposed by the Labor government is to basically increase the rate of tax on superannuation holdings over $3 million. Now, people might well say, oh, that's good, that's a lot of money, and people that have saved for their future should be taxed. But I don't subscribe to that at all. I mean, first of all, the question has to be why do we need to tax people more when we're already incredibly heavily taxed in this country? And secondly, what are we doing with the money apart from anything else? I mean, you've got bureaucracies inside this government, state, federal, and local, that just boggle the mind in terms of their size and what they actually do. I think we can find much easier ways to reduce the tax burden on people, but this Labor government wants to continue that assault. The worst part of this, though, Treaders, is that what they're actually looking to do is potentially tax unrealised gains. Now, what that means in plain English is on your balance sheet of assets that you might have, your home. Home's a bad example because they're not looking at that at the moment, but you might have, let's say, shareholdings that are, likely to go up in value. But you haven't realised them. So, people will be aware of capital gains tax at the moment, where once you actually make the sale, the taxation event happens. What this government's proposing is to look at those assets as unrealised. So you haven't actually got the money in your hand. You're just sitting on an asset that's appreciating, and they're going to tax that as well. So, I mean, it's just madness. It's the rise of big government in this country, and the rise of the need to fund that. The governments that continue to expand, continue to creep into people's lives, have to find a way to fuel that machine, and they do that by taking your money.
Yeah, and how do we stop it? Because if it's anything to go by the recent election, they've got the numbers in both houses. Clearly, people are half asleep or choose not to. They might have looked and vote and go, oh, well, do we like that person or that person? Oh, he looks better. I like his glasses. To a
Yeah.
level, sometimes you got to question the motives of the individual, or they write a rude picture on a piece of voting paper and put that in the like. How we can sit there and whinge about it, and the first question, how do you control it? Because they control it anyway, and soon we'll go into this new government. They'll control the Senate, they'll control the lower house and the upper house, as we know. And how do you stop it?
There's a couple of layers to that. I mean, the first thing, I guess, is elections really are where these things are won and lost. The job of the opposition, though, is to provide a clear alternative and to provide a set of policies and values that you take to an election that would stand against this, and to highlight these things as well. I mean, I have said it publicly many, many times, but I don't think on any measure our side, my side of politics, did that at all well in the last election. And I think people ultimately ended up saying, well, better the devil you know, in a sense, and voted for the left of politics. I mean, the left of politics, not just the Labor Party, but others. And that's given us a Labor government. So that's the first thing. It needs clear positions from the opposition, and that should be low taxing. I should say, though, that leadership in my party has been very clear about opposing to an inch of their lives the super tax things that we just discussed. So you can guarantee that. But it's going into the election that we've got to be clear about what we stand for. The next thing is, right. I mean, at the moment, Labor have an outright majority in the House of Representatives, which means they can pass the first stage of the legislative process very, very easily. You know, just whatever they like, they can do. When it's in the Senate, things become a little more complicated. They don't have the numbers in their own right. Political party, that means Unfortunately, you've got the Labor Party who then now need to rely on the Greens to get things done. Now, the Greens, presumably, as a party, would say, well, we want whatever we start with in legislative terms, but we want, more on top of that. So, they may well take that legislation and say, well, let's not make it 30%, let's make it 40% or whatever the concessions they want in order to pass it. So Labor are now, instead of having to deal with the likes of One Nation, the United Australia Party and others, are now dealing directly with the Greens, which may well take bad law and make it worse. So this is the thing we're fronted with the next 3 years. The reality is, I think things are going to get even harder for Australians, which is tragic. It's absolutely unfathomable in a country like ours, which is so blessed with natural resources and land, and anybody should be doing it as tough as some Australians are at the moment. We've got Aussies that are out of homes, homelessness. We've got people that have no savings that are living right on the edge of the line, and it just shouldn't be happening in this country at the moment. So look, I think it's up to us to get that message across, but I think it's going to be a tough 3 years.
Well, you touch on that affordability and the assets we own. Australia is one of the most rich resource countries in the world. I saw Andrew Bogut, who's a bit of a freedom fighter, former NBA star, talking on his podcast and on social media, saying, how is it the case that we sell it off to next to Nixon, buy it back for a hell of a lot more? Is there ever going to be a case where we actually utilise the assets we've got and we actually make ourselves a rich country off the back of that instead of giving it away for nothing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Yeah, there's, once again, a lot of layers to that. But I mean, even at its best, we sell our commodities and don't do anything with them. We really should be, as a country that's got everything you could possibly need in an island, we should be digging things up, making things out of them and selling them and using our kind of technical skills as well. But a lot of that has just been degraded over the years, mainly, I would say, because of this push into the climate emergency that doesn't exist, this sort of net zero nonsense that we've got. We now don't have any manufacturing really in this country to speak of, aside from a few minor areas. We still, manufacture some things in food and whatever, but basically manufacturing is gone. My YouTube feed the other day brought up a video of Adelaide in 1966. Apparently the algorithm's been feeding it into other people as well, I've heard, but it was really interesting. It's now with the National Film archives, and it shows a very prosperous city in 1966. The guy in the video, it's a sort of a promo video, goes off to the Chrysler factory, which is making cars, and then there are people sitting in an electronics factory soldering radios together, and we made stuff. And we don't do that anymore because of globalism, we've shipped those jobs overseas. We've raised the cost of energy, which means everything is more expensive in this country. Everything, food, clothing, everything we buy has to be shipped in. Everything we buy has an impost on it because of the net zero scam. And we effectively now, Aussies pay the price. We should be doing all of those things. So is there a world in which that exists? Well, there is, once we start getting sensible political leadership and we start bringing those jobs back to Australia. That starts with the very first thing that starts with is casting off the shackles of net zero.
Yeah, and you touch on you're hot on the net zero. The more I read about it, the more I believe it. It's a farce too. I've seen that via the South Australian Liberals, which obviously you head up here as being a senator federally, but also have a fair bit to do with the partying, bringing the next rank of politicians. You've pretty much gone out publicly and said we're no to net zero. Why is that? And do you think you'll get that to a national landscape, both federally, because that seems like it could be a bit of a stumbling block?
Yeah, look, so that's it was a great result. We had our state council, so it's a bit boring and complicated to talk about, but effectively the party membership meet quarterly with their representatives on our state council. It's its governing body, and it 2 or 3 weeks ago debated the issue of net zero, and it moved to tell the federal parliamentary party to drop net zero basically as a policy position. Now, that was always directed at the federal party from that motion, which was overwhelmingly supported on the floor of state council. It doesn't actually have any, it doesn't have any binding effect on either state or federal party, but it sends a pretty clear message that the membership of the Liberal Party here in South Australia can see the wood for the trees on this. They understand it doesn't make any sense at all for a range of reasons. We're 1 point something percent of the world's emissions. Even if you buy the science, which I think is incredibly dubious. Even if you buy that science, we're 1% of the world's emissions. We've got countries like China and the United States China is responsible for more than 30% of the world's emissions. The United States about 18 or thereabouts. They're both backing off from this. China never really adopted it. The United States has pulled out of the Paris Treaty. And yet here, where we're an absolute drop in the ocean, we are bulldozing native forests in order to put transmission lines up at a cost of several $1 trillion potentially. We are using agricultural land for solar panels. We're putting wind farms on top of beautiful marine cliffs and all the way through agricultural land, potentially disrupting its viability in future. And what for? So our members understood that. It went to the floor of our State Council. It was accepted. And that has resonated throughout the country. I have to say, there are other divisions that are now doing the same things. The New South Wales National Party membership passed a similar motion on the weekend. Other divisions, I understand, are doing it as well. So the message to the parliamentary party, people like me inside the parliamentary party, is your members don't want this. They can see it for what it is. Let's step outside the parliamentary bubble and let's get sensible about our energy policy. And I think when it's properly explained to the Australian people, I think you'd get a hugely overwhelming acceptance rate. Our job is to join the dots on what's happening out there. One of the reasons why everything is unaffordable at the moment is because of this. It is just, it's like President Trump said, if you drill, baby, drill, you drop the price of everything across the board because everything relies on transport, on heat, on manufacturing. And that's just the name of the game. It is just the absolute lowest of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to a policy position, and we shouldn't be pursuing it.
How long till you think you'll get a statement where you're able to, as a Liberal Party, go, we don't believe in it, Albo, over to you? Because that'll really put pressure on the government, I would assume.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, obviously, we're still in the stages of policy development after the election, and there's a lot to be done. I think there's a new leadership. They're finding their feet. They're getting things done, putting people into the right places, new portfolios, and all the rest of it. So, look, all of that will become clear in the next few weeks and months. But look, I mean, my job is to advocate for things that I think are good for the country, not good for other people or whoever or China or whatever the issue is. And so I'll just continue to be talking about that. And now, I can go to my party room and say the members of the South Australian Liberal Party agree.
Yeah. And go back a few years, COVID hits. You're the one that did see it for what it is. A lot of that stuff is being mainstream now after being hidden for so many years and suppressed, obviously, the so-called mis and disinformation. How does it now sit with you personally within the party that's now obviously copped a hammering in footy, AFL footy terms, as we both follow? It's probably a 10-goal hammering. At the election, does it get to a stage now that personally there is some vindication to go, hey, we are on the right direction because our voters have said what they've said about us? Because it almost looked as if the Liberal Party lost its identity. They've always been centre right, and it looks like they're another version of the left, but not as hard as Labor.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic all in itself. It's sort of 5 years ago now, and it seems like an eternity ago. But it also feels like we haven't quite got to the point we need to yet. I mean, we've been calling for a royal commission into COVID. Many of us, myself, Matt Canavan, Gerard Rennick, when he was with the party, and others for the whole time, and continue to do so. It hasn't happened. Doesn't look like it's going to happen under this government, but it needs to because the stories have got to come out. They are coming out slowly, and I think as the hysteria died down, people started to see this for what it was. I mean, it was never acceptable to force people to take a medical product of any sort. It never was, and people lost their jobs over this, of course, as we well know. It was just illiberal, and it was both sides of politics that were in power on various levels. We had state governments that were Liberal and Labor, and we had a Liberal government in Canberra at the time. Things could have been done. We moved to try and do those. I think if you asked around now, I think there'd be more acceptance of it all. I think there are some issues that are still not properly understood, mainly because they haven't been mainstreamed yet. I mean, the media still don't want to talk about this. If they do, they're sort of, crab walking sideways rather than, forwards. And we expect that out of them. But because, of course, many of the people who were telling us to do things, 5 years ago, are just not willing to say they were wrong, which, they were. So, look, it's a slow process. In terms of political lessons, look, I don't know. I mean, I think you'd find a different response now from our side of the party. I think people were swept up in it. It was very easy for the fear to be whipped up. I think it was in many cases sort of understandable that people got caught up in the hysteria. But my mission in life is to introduce people as far as I can into politics, help them find their way through, that can see through the fog of war in those times and understand what the real issues are. We don't need any more politicians rolling up their sleeves for cameras, telling them how incredible they are to get their flu vaccine or whatever. I don't need that. I'll keep my medical, decisions between me and my doctor. And I, like when you think back on it, it's bizarre that it became so okay to ask people, what they'd done with their own medicine. Like you do that now. I mean, nobody would walk up to you now in the street and say, how was your colonoscopy? Like, how did it go? Was it great? Did you enjoy it? Like but yet 5 years ago, it was perfectly acceptable to say to someone, how many have you had? How many jabs have you had? So, I don't know. I hope that that's dawned on a few more, but, I think for the greatest part, most people are trying to make it go away. Whereas there are still many of us that don't want that to happen because we need to get to the bottom of this so that we can truly expose what happened.
Do you then have some concerns off the back of Penny Wong and Albanese effectively govern me harder signing up for the World Health Organization's new treaty, so to speak? Because that seems to
I
have
mean,
slipped through the radar very quickly.
yeah, look, the whole issue of the pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations and our involvement with the World Health Organization as a general rule are, they are unnecessarily complicated, and they're sort of almost done in bite-sized parts, so that I think what you find is the groundswell of resistance builds up and then it goes away, and then it builds up and then it goes away, and it seems to me from a distance that that body is just sort of once again, slicing the salami in order to get to the end game. My view on this is that we should be completely distanced and not involved from the World Health Organization, full stop, for a range of reasons, not the least of which being that it just completely got everything wrong with COVID. That's just one of them. And now our government is seemingly signing us up to the new version of the pandemic treaty, which I think is a sort of still a work in progress. There are still some parts of it that haven't been voted on. But the question for me is why? I mean, why would we allow a foreign, and they call it supranational, unelected body to dictate terms? The argument is always from politics in this country that we would never hand over our sovereignty to another body or another nation, so we would, and that's sort of, it's kind of right, but kind of not very realistic. There'll be nothing that happens out of a treaty, a pandemic treaty, which provides a direct link to Australian power. What it does do, though, is it provides us with a framework under our constitution to legislate locally. So that treaty will ultimately be signed off on by the country. Then it comes back to Parliament. It goes through a committee process, which is basically just a rubber stamp operation. And then it goes through Houses of Parliament, which again, the Labor Party and the Greens control. So that's another rubber stamp operation. It becomes part of our treaty obligations, and then the opportunity exists for laws to be crafted around that. So, I always use the example of people will remember during COVID that you couldn't leave Australia if you didn't have, I think, 2 COVID, injections. And I always asked why would that be? If it was so dangerous and you were so dangerous without them, then why wouldn't you just let people go overseas? And the answer that I got back from the health bureaucrats in the Senate was, well, because that's our obligation under the Biosecurity Act. The Biosecurity Act was amended in in keeping with the international health regulations many, many moons ago. So, this is how it all creeps in. It's easy for politicians to say, oh, the World Health Organization won't dictate terms, but they kind of do. And if they won't, then why would we sign up to it in the first place? Like, what would be the point of agreeing to this, allowing us to be anyway influenced, which this clearly will? It's not in Australia's best interests to have that kind of messaging coming from a global health body like the World Health Organization, and we should be away from it.
Is it almost a case that it's the guy that's got the biggest pants has to fight it? Because let's face it, I think we're both Trump aligned supporters. I think you've met the man. I certainly haven't. I like the policy. I like he stands for something. I don't know him personally as a human, but I look at what he does, and he's just saying, "No, US is out. Get
Yeah,
stuffed."
yeah. Well, his whole platform is America first, and I mean, the whole acronym MAGA, as he says many times, it stands for Make America Great Again. And, somehow it's been kind of built up into this sort of terrible. It's like, I mean, as he says, well, of course they wouldn't agree with that. We've got people on the other side of his politics that don't have the country's interests at heart. And I mean, this is the thing, like, I mean, with all of these things, like with net zero, does anyone think that net zero, for example, is going to have any impact on the climate in Australia? I mean, it's just, if you do, you're just off with the pixies. And the same is true with the World Health Organization. I mean, what benefit could that be to Australians' health to have people in a foreign country telling us what to do? We have to get a sense of Australia first back into the political landscape. There is a very strange thing that happens in that building. I can't sort of explain to people exactly what it's like, but it is like walking through the doors of Narnia into a different land. You walk into the building having come from your state with people that understand your language and are kind of talking about the things you're talking about, and then as soon as you walk into that building, the narrative and the message just gets captured by the political class and the media, and all of a sudden those things are just thrown out the window, and all of a sudden you're talking about whatever has got the interest of the mainstream media for the day, and it's very difficult to break through. It's very difficult to do that because I think a lot of these things are just sort of top down. They're run by the media, they're run by the bureaucratic class, hard to say, and the politicians seem to be just bound and gagged in many instances.
Did you like the hypocrisy of the Channel 9 journo being shot with a rubber bullet in Hollywood, yet our own police shoot people at the shrine in Victoria and there's nothing wrong with it?
Yeah, I mean, well, to start off, I wouldn't want to see anyone shot with a rubber bullet. Apparently, it hurts quite a lot. But I think it does make the point that, I mean, I cannot believe there was not more outcry about that incident in Melbourne. I mean, as I said, like looking back on 5 years ago as to what happened in this country, like it just doesn't. I mean, I cannot. If you stopped people now and said, right, well, you can't go to work until you have your toenails clipped, people would say, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? Whatever the analogy is. I mean, they mounted a case that it was, you were saving other people if you had this, if you did what you were told and got your injection. That was never true. That was always wrong. And science will show you that. So that incident at the War Memorial, I mean, it just goes to show how the media just tell whatever version they want. I just think, look, people. I'm sure you haven't got an aerial plugged in anymore. I certainly don't. I don't watch any mainstream news. I get all my news from social media, and I think that's why the political class are so desperate to shut that down. I think people are switching off, and the ability to control the narrative has just been lost. Now, the flip side to that is, yeah, there's a lot of nonsense out in social media, and there's a lot of things that are wrong. But I mean, people can tell the difference between nonsense and not. And the one thing you can't do in life is stop people from talking and allow government to tell you what's true and what's not. Because we basically saw that during COVID. I mean, that was literally what happened. Even though the mainstream media weren't government, itself, they were certainly pushing the narrative. No question about that. I mean,
Yeah.
how is it possible you could have people telling the same story over that with no dissent? None. Except for a few. Adam Crichton, the great journalist from The Australian, was one who did. He's not with them anymore, but he did an incredible job. There were a handful that did a really good job, but basically everybody just took a number and stood in line other than that.
Because I saw it firsthand, it was like, here, go and ask this question. This is the narrative. And I talked about on this podcast earlier what I witnessed in the 9 newsroom in Adelaide, where there are actually 300 nurses outside the studios protesting. One told a story about how many adolescent kids had been sick from the vax. I went to front my boss on it, and he told me effectively to go away. So that is the thing. And what Gerard Rennick, who used to be a fellow cohort in the Liberal Party with you and in the Senate, said to me, he said I think there was a law around that a pharmaceutical can't directly advertise with media, but they can do it through government. So it was all lockstep. We all know it. We get the other side of this immigration because we're seeing Victoria got all sorts of issues on the streets. I know you're a South Australian senator. We're seeing what's happened, what Trump's doing in America and kicking out a lot of people. That's why we've got all these riots everywhere. Do you think it needs to be a stage that there's any chance the Labor Party stops letting people flood in because people, as you say, can't get enough houses, prices are through the roof, they're getting funding that the average taxpayer is not getting. It doesn't seem, it seems like a recipe to collapse the economy more so than help it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what we talk about the housing crisis. Well, I mean, I think the housing crisis can be boiled down to basically one issue, which is mass migration. I mean, that's sort of the main issue. Of course, the others are the cost. Everything's more expensive because we're bringing it in, and cost of fuel has spiked, so that's the true as well. And the other one, of course, is just the amount of regulation. I mean, ask anyone that's tried to build anywhere, and by the time you get through local, state, and federal laws, depending on where you are, you might as well just add zeros onto the end of the build and years. So, I mean, it's a combination of all of those factors. But look, I mean, for me, we didn't even hear anything about how many people had entered the country until almost the first year was over of the last parliamentary term. And, my concern is we'll do that again. I mean, it needs to be said, none of us, what do they say? You don't hate the player, you hate the game. None of us have an issue with people coming, to this country. I mean, we are all a product of that at some point. But the numbers are just out of control. I mean, they're talking potentially another 1.8 million through this parliamentary term. Now, I mean, my mind boggles on that. We have something like an extra 7 or 8 million people over the last, whatever the stat is, I mean, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but the last 20 to 30 years, the country has just ballooned. And of course, the services haven't kept up. So, once your kids and my kids didn't vote for this, obviously, I didn't vote for this. At some point, the government has got to say, well, who are we here for? Are we here for the Australians that are currently, living and breathing in this country, or are we doing a different, are we, for the greater good of the global community, like whatever. My point is that if we're continuing to let people in, we are not doing any justice to people that are here and have been here. What we should be doing is making life easier for families in Australia to have babies, apart from anything else. If there's a population crisis, which there's a massive fertility problem in this country, then let's find a way to reform our tax system. Let's find a way to make it easier for people to build houses, rather than having to import people, which I mean, good for them. I would want to come here too. It's a great place, and from some of the places people are coming from, of course they would want to. But that's not necessarily in the best interests of Australians at this time. So migration absolutely has to be hauled right back to a minimum. And I mean, I don't see that happening. I mean, I think we're going to continue to see that. And we've got to be brave about this. I mean, the problem is that as soon as you say we need to stop migration, people say you're a racist. Well, I mean, that's just rubbish. That's absolute nonsense. And the political class, particularly on my side, has to muscle up and start prosecuting those arguments properly. Otherwise, people are going to continue to walk away from major parties and vote elsewhere.
It's interesting what we're seeing now. We're on the cusp of potentially a World War III, it looks like, in the Middle East. Donald Trump's playing an interesting role in that. You look at they're our greatest probably ally and partner, both for military wise, but also trading wise. Yet the policies of the Albanese government and the Trump government seem to be totally at odds.
It's going to be really interesting to watch. It'll be really interesting to see what is said after the event. And of course, we've got all sorts of, subplots here between AUKUS, the subs deal, and clearly the Trump administration's desire to see allies spend more on defence, which is quite right, frankly. I mean, if I was an American taxpayer, I wouldn't want to be subsidising other people, Europe and Australia. We should be doing that ourselves as well. And so there's a whole range of things. But yeah, the interesting thing is actually free speech. We don't know what the agenda of the next Labor government is going to look like, but they tried to push the misinformation laws during the last parliament, and they were widely held down. I mean, it was actually one of the very good moments of the last parliament that we saw so much pushback. A lot of us did a lot of work to try and resist that law, and we saw the independents in the Senate really conspire against it and walk away from that law. And so ultimately, the Labor government just didn't put it up. Having said that, we then saw a series of other, what I would call anti-free speech laws, which did make it through, including the banning of social media for children, which is a mistake. And that was supported by my own side across the floor on that, and other laws, the hate speech laws as well, because it is a critical issue. I mean, I think we've, it's really interesting. We've seen, if you go back 25 years, sort of the mid-90s or thereabouts, when the internet started, it was championed as a great thing. We would get the message of free speech out to the rest of the world, and they would rise up and democracy would reign. And then all of a sudden, that's what happened. And then someone didn't like it. The powers that be did not like it at all. And we can see that I don't think anyone at that point ever really thought that it would compete and in fact drown out the mainstream media so badly. And so then these terms misinformation and disinformation were coined and have been parroted around by, every politician that, can't think for themselves. And here we are now, all of a sudden, oh no, it's a bad thing. We don't want people talking. We don't want people talking online. We don't want that. And so, we've got to, people have got to understand that that is a serious threat and a serious issue. And I think the Trump administration does that. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, has made a couple of very early statements about free speech and the manner in which that the American government interacts with their allies across the world on those issues. So it's going to be very interesting to see what comes of all of that.
At home, the South Australian Labor government has, and I know some of my listeners are filthy on this. Effectively, these new laws they're trying to push through, forcing sales on properties, and whether they actually get the proceeds of those sales, it's still being worked through. If you've owned a property, say for example, you've held a vacant block, you want to keep it for your kids, you might actually have it in your super. Now it could be a case that if it's been undeveloped for too long, the government can just deem by themselves that no, that should be sold because of our housing problems.
Yeah. So look, I mean, this actually comes out of the Australian Greens, and it was a bill I think introduced into the Legislative Council, so the sort of Senate equivalent in the states Parliament. It passed extraordinarily. It passed. So the Labor government here must have allowed that passage. I think although I haven't seen the numbers, the Liberal Party, of course, did not support it, as it shouldn't, because it's an assault on property rights. Ultimately, I mean. What is being suggested is that a designated entity, so that could be a council, the state government, will have the power effectively to determine whether someone should be using land, their own land, which they own under a Torrens title system that dates back to the 1800s, which has served us so well. They'll be able to say, well, you should be using that land and you're not. So we're going to take it from you from a lease point of view, use it, develop it, use it as a park, whatever they see fit to do, and then we'll tell you what you can do with your land. Once again, this is the problem with the left of politics. So the left of politics is not the left of politics that your dad's generation or my dad's generation knew. That's not an environmentalist position for the Australian Greens. That is a big government position which simply looks to further impose government on people's own fundamental rights to own property, which is something we're meant to hold dear in this country and in this state. I don't think it'll see the light of day in the House of Assembly here in the state parliament. I don't see how Labor in this state play this sort of funny game where they're kind of like, we're trying to look a little bit like a Liberal government, but we then do all the other stuff as well. They won't want to upset the property people, the property council. So I don't think there's any genuine danger of this coming up, but it's sitting on the books ready to be debated in the House of Assembly. It is one meeting away from becoming law in this country. Why did it get through in the first place is my question. Like, what is the point here? What is the whole exercise? This should just be abandoned. It should never be talked about again. But once again, a little bit like we discussed earlier with the unrealized super. This is what we see when the so-called progressive left rise in a country. All of a sudden, they don't have any way of making money for the country through private means, through bringing in business, through making us an attractive haven for investors. Quite the opposite. They're running away from this country at the moment. So they start cannibalizing the assets that people already have. And this is just another limb of that. This is just, if I have, I mean, look, the answer, once again, they want to tell you that the answer to the housing crisis is Airbnb, because somebody might have they've made hard decisions along the way to invest in a property, to make sacrifices for them and their family in order to own an asset and rent it to people, which, by the way, provides a net benefit to the community, because if I've got an Airbnb in Coffin Bay or the Barossa, I'm doing something good for the community. Now, they want to tell you that because that person holds that property, they have the responsibility for the housing crisis. Well, I mean, it's just, look, it's just complete nonsense. The reality is you could fix the housing crisis by stopping the mass migration, dropping net zero, and removing just about every single piece of regulation that's been put on the housing sector in the last 20 years, being a little bit facetious there, but whatever. And you wouldn't have a problem. This is not land banking. This is not rich property people chewing on the end of a cigar and laughing at poor people. That's just a construct in these people's minds. People should be allowed to acquire, they should be allowed to aspire to better things, and we should be encouraging that.
Well, you make too much sense for a politician, Senator Antic. It's funny, isn't it? The local government the Labor government got in over the Marshall government previously because they wanted to fix ramping. Well, that hasn't happened, but we buy wonderful toys, which I enjoy, which is gather round and golf. So it's amazing the level of thought that people do have, and at some stage they've got to rise, don't they, and speak for what they actually hold dear, and whether that is lifestyle, because at the moment it's crumbling away.
Yeah, well, I mean, good on you for doing it. I mean, look, it's a twofold exercise. It's about politicians standing for something as well, which is what we have to do on my side of politics. That's the first thing. You've got to give people something to aim at, but then it's also for people out there in the community to take more of an interest in politics as well. I think Aussies have got to understand the problems that are facing us now. This is not a storm that's off in the distance. The storm is here. It is here and it is on us right now. And it is a massive global and domestic series of issues that are confronting the Australian people. The starting point for all of this is getting people back into politics. People have got to start taking an interest in what happens. It's not just party politics. It's also getting people involved in their footy club as well, like you have done. Congratulations to you on that. And also taking a stand on things in their workplace, and speaking their mind. We saw this all the way through. We saw it with The Voice. The Aussies didn't want it. They never wanted it. They also didn't want to get shouted at by people that did want it. So they shut up until they realised everybody was with them. And then they were comfortable coming out and saying, no, we don't want a two-speed system where certain people get certain rights. That's not Australian. It's not even close. So why would you want that? And I think the reality is there's a lot of us that agree the same things, and and none of us are racists, none of us are white supremacists. All this language that gets thrown around, that's just designed to shut us up. And good on you for doing the podcast as well, because I know there are some out there in the footy world that you've got a lot of controversial opinions. Well, that's great. As long as they don't hurt anyone, I'm all for everyone having an opinion.
Yeah, well, there's too many people wanting a free dinner, so no thanks. But thanks for your time, Senator.
No worries. Thanks, Treaders.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ballsy Show. We'll have another episode up there soon. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so you can comment below. And if you feel like supporting us, you can also donate us a coffee. That link's below. Thanks again.